Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the March briefing session. Welcome, everybody. Just for the record, all proceedings of this meeting are recorded and live streamed. So, acknowledgement, the town of Bassendean acknowledges the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the region. Announcements by the presiding person without discussion. I've only got one small announcement. We have a Women in the Workshop set of events happening in April and May, and this is a really lovely set of workshops. It will be held at the Bassendean Community Men's Shed, and if you would like to know more information, just go onto the town's website and there is a form there where you can fill in if you wish to have an expression of interest in participating in those workshops. And also, given that it's happening at the Men's Shed, gentlemen don't need to feel left out because they can register to join the Men's Shed at any time. Thank you. Announce attendance's apologies. We have two apologies from Councillor Emily Wilding, who is on a leave of absence, and Councillor Ken John, who is an apology for tonight. We also have one of the officers, Mr. Paul White, Director of Corporate Services, who is an apology as well. I don't believe there are any other apologies for this evening. Yes, the Minutes Secretary is also an apology for this evening. Okay. Councillors, do we have any conflict of interest or... I don't believe there is any conflict of interest on any of the items on the agenda. Okay. So we now move to statements by members of the public. Councillor Burke.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, can I put in an application for leave, or do I do that next week?
We vote on that next week.
Next week, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Okay. So we have several statements that have been sent in by email. Now, some of these statements are from people who are in attendance, who have said they're in attendance, and others are from people who are not in attendance. Now, for those that are not in attendance for a statement, I will actually take those on notice and have the officers provide a written response to those particular people. Most of the statements relate to the Success Hill Nurstead Avenue item. So I have here a statement from Emma Darby, who said that she will be in attendance, but I don't see her in the chamber. Okay, so we'll take that one on notice and get the officers to respond to that one. Okay, I have a statement here from Katarina Wolf. Katarina, you are in the chamber. If you would like to come to the microphone, state your name and address and read out your statement, that would be excellent. Sorry?
So I've got a question and a deputation.
We're doing statements. I've got you here as a statement. Are you doing... Okay.
I've got questions as well.
Okay, so Councillor Ames, would you be able to turn on the microphone to begin with? So, Katarina, do you wish to make a statement before we go on to questions and deputations?
Not.
Okay. Okay, so I'll ask if there are any other people in the audience who'd like to make a statement before we go on to public question time. Deputation, sorry. We can go on to deputations. Katarina, I know you've got a deputation. So deputations are 10 minutes long, and we do open it up to councillors to ask you questions afterwards.
And I promise everyone I won't be talking for 10 minutes.
So
Is everyone excited about that?
Thank you very much.
So we're going straight into deputations.
Your name and
before
address,
questions?
and then straight into
Yep.
the deputation.
Okay, my name is Katarina Wolf, and I live at 4 Nurstead Avenue in Bassendean. Good evening, everyone. I said I won't be talking for 10 minutes. My name is Katharina Wolf. I'm the owner or the guardian of number 4 Newstead Avenue, an early 1900s Federation era property, which is one amongst a cluster of at least 8 properties that date back to what was then known as Newstead Estate. And these properties have been lovingly cared for and maintained by their respective guardians, some of which are in the room, many of which are in the room. And as kitchen gardens and adjoining grazing land was gradually sold off and made way for new developments, amazingly these properties still maintain their intact today, and I think many of you have seen those photos. So that original cluster is still there and it's still intact, and some of those images were included in the recent council report, and they really shape the streetscape in terms of characteristics by red-faced brick, render and weatherboard. I'm personally pleased to see the Heritage Assessment Report by Hacking Heritage and Architecture has taken note of submissions that were made by the owners of 4 of these properties in mid-2023, arguing in favour of inclusion in the town's heritage survey. Previously known as West Guildford, this is an area rich of history, valued by the wider Bassendean community, and a core feature on the town's much-loved heritage trail. And indeed, going back further in history, this area would have represented a vital connection between the male meeting place up in Success Hill and a female meeting place in the Mindaring area of the local Noongar people. As current local residents, we're passionate about protecting this special part of town. We believe it's really special, a part that connects us to our past and provides context for our future. The report submitted by Hacking Heritage and Architecture was initiated following a local residents' proposal, and that proposal was part of the Earls Ferry Court Heritage Area consultation period in late 2023. And the proposal was to extend the existing heritage area to include the former Newstead Estate. And indeed, given that the existing heritage area only includes 1 property of heritage value, the extension to Newstead Estate would have placed a Category 1 Earls Ferry House within its geographical, cultural and historical context, rather than leaving it as it is at the moment on its own, surrounded by relatively recent subdivisions. So it's noteworthy that Earls Ferry House, prior to its subdivision, was located at the end of Newstead Avenue, thereby further emphasising the historical connection. Newstead Avenue remains the only access to Earls Ferry House, and the community proposal for a heritage area or heritage area extension aimed to connect 2 very important historical sites in the town of Bassendean, and that's at one end the historical dot resident at number 8 Thompson Road, including that Moreton Bay fig, the huge one, and at the other end Earls Ferry House. We were looking at a corridor connecting those 2 important sites. So speaking on behalf of the community, we are therefore puzzled to see, well, first of all, Earls Ferry House to be excluded from the heritage value assessment of this small, frequently overlooked land and rail lock pocket of Bassendean. It is not included in that report in front of you. And at the same time, we're puzzled to see that the original Success Hill South area has been extended to include Area 12, west of Lord Street, an area that is, well, first of all, it's not located in Success Hill. It is, as the report notes, different in historical development, character and aesthetic value, and it's not connected to Area 13 in any way, shape or form, neither by foot nor by vehicles. So the only thing those 2 areas have in common is that they're both road and rail locked and accessible via their respective single point access roads. However, in terms of heritage value, the original Success Hill South area has more in common with Success Hill North, hence the name, and hence the methodology used for this particular assessment in the report, I would say, is flawed. Because if the aim was indeed to engage in a heritage assessment on the back of the December 2023 council meeting, well, first of all, it's flawed because it excludes Earls Ferry House and the existing Earls Ferry Court heritage area. And by annexing properties at the north end of Whitfield Street, it thereby dilutes the overall heritage value of the now extended area. So according to the report, of the 54 occupied residential blocks in the original Newstead Estate, or that area east of Lord Street, there are 23 houses of considerable or some value, and that's 43%. As residents and self-declared guardians as part of Bassendean or former West Guildford's history, we don't need to be convinced ourselves about the historical value of our respective properties. Personally, it really doesn't matter to me if my property is included in the heritage survey or not, but I think it's important noting for the wider Bassendean community. What does, however, matter to us is that these properties, dating back more than 120 years, and which are a crucial part of our collective history, are preserved going forward, given their current context, and preserving them for future generations to enjoy. Given the annexing of Success Hill South as part of the town centre and the consequent rezoning of what has traditionally been a quiet land and rail-lock pocket of R20 residential housing, urgent steps, I believe, need to be taken to ensure that any future construction is indeed sympathetic with the historical character of the historical Nurstead estate, to avoid a gradual loss of our history and the real risk of literally white-anting these 19th century properties. Indeed, the State Minister for the Planning and Housing, the Honorary John Kerry, just recently been reinstated, advised us as local residents and the local MP in 2023 that the local heritage protection provisions would be the appropriate next step to ensure the existing character elements of the area remain. So I appreciate the recommendations that a precinct structure plan may, or even will, include heritage considerations. However, at this point in time, we don't have a precinct structure plan. Likewise, we don't have any design guidelines in place to ensure that future development is indeed sympathetic to the existing heritage context. 50 months have passed since we were last here. I know time flies, but so since the Council last resolved to further explore the heritage and character of Nurstead Avenue, these 50 months have gone by. They've gone by quite quickly, but likewise a lot of things have happened in the same time as well. So now, obviously, the heritage assessment in its new form has been extended to include previously not mentioned areas, including Lamb Street and the separate area at the end of Whitfield Street. So eventually we will have a precinct structure plan, but it's not going to happen within the next few months. And a lot can happen in the meantime. And my concern is, how do we deal with the development approvals in the meantime? The 2018 Build Form and Character Study by Stephen Carrick Architects emphasised building scales that dominate the existing scale of the character area as a threat in relation to what is Area 13. So local residents, I know there was a previous point, can only do so much. Most of the councillors in this particular room have emphasised during their previous election campaigns that they deeply value our town's history. Indeed, this mirrors residents' feedback at the recent Town of Bassendean Citizen Panel Workshop, and it's a continuous theme. The town itself extensively references the value of Bassendean's heritage on its website and in its associated collateral. So I'm therefore here calling on the council, and by extension the town of Bassendean, to put interim measures in place, the same measures that are currently in place for other areas of historical value, such as Kenny Street and Devon Street, to ensure that any future developments in this important pocket of Bassendean are sympathetic to the existing streetscape, to protect Bassendean's future history for future generations to come before it's lost forever.
Thank you very much, Katerina. Councillors, anyone would like to ask questions? Councillor Polifka.
Thank you for coming in this evening, and I certainly can recall when most councillors around the table did go on a site inspection of Nurstead, and there were, I suppose, competing views at that time, but tonight I understand we've got more people that are supportive of retaining the heritage character. One comment that you made, and it was in relation to new building being sympathetic to the existing. In terms of that, would your expectation that being sympathetic to buildings of that era be that they wouldn't exceed 2 stories in height, or would you be of the view that something that resembled or took cues from the architecture of the past could potentially be to a greater height, provided it was to that, I suppose, standard that was sympathetic to the surrounding buildings? Yeah,
and that's a key issue, because we've got the two different issues that are frequently being conflated. I'm not talking about zoning. I know zoning is an entirely different conversation to have. I'm talking about being sympathetic to the streetscape, and also talking about setbacks. What can we do so new developments don't actually drown out those existing historical sites and houses, and ultimately will contribute to diluting them, people moving out, these houses eventually getting demolished, and we're going to lose them forever. So I do understand they're two different points.
Yeah. So on that point, in terms of the being sympathetic, I think there was recently a matter. Well, I know there was recently a matter before this council where that issue came up for deliberation, and that was determined in favour of rejecting a proposal that was, I suppose, there were various reasons, but one of them was whether it was sympathetic to the surrounding heritage area. So obviously, from what you've said, your view is not to seek to limit development, just you want, I suppose, for want of a better term, good development, as opposed to just any old thing being put in there.
Councillor Polifka, questions only.
Yes, so I mean that would be I suppose what you would be seeking to achieve through this process.
I am. I'm seeking for design guidelines that are sympathetic to the area. I do understand that the zoning question is a completely different matter and is completely unrelated. So my concern in this regard is really the heritage look and feel,
yes,
and ensuring that that feel maintains, and that we therefore can actually protect those existing properties rather than, white hunting them really.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for clarifying.
Thank you.
Councillors, further questions? I'll leave it at that. Oh, Councillor Carter, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for your deputation, Ms. Wolfe. You mentioned the link between the heritage area of Thompson's Road and Earls Ferry.
Mm-hmm.
That road between the two of them is actually, you believe, is actually a key context. Is that right?
That's correct. So it's providing the context aid. It's the only access road to Earls Ferry House.
Yeah.
Which is the main heritage site in that area. But yes, historically it is the main connector. That road is the main connection because the Dot residence was the one that was eventually subdivided, turned into Nurstead Estate, and that's where those first few properties actually came from, and that's where some of those old photos in the appendices you've got there in front of you in the report are coming from. So I see that in a greater context in terms of historical storytelling. It's that important visual connection between those two, and I also do believe that it really sets the sets the Earl Ferry House site within its wider context. Because at the moment these two are very much disjointed.
Yes.
Without that heritage overlay, yes.
And if I can ask one more question, you see this as a completely integrated view of this heritage. You need the two. They're bookended. Nurstead Avenue is bookended by these two great heritage places.
It is very much.
And from what I'm gathering from what you're saying, and they inform the importance of that.
They do, because you've got that overall narrative that sets together, and I see Nurstead Avenue as providing the context to these two sites, and actually providing the link between what was the Dot residence, which predates those developments, and then Earls Ferry House. So it is that it's that visual and historical connection between those two. So that's why the community put forward initially the proposal to have that overlay over that entire area. Hence also my puzzlement that the Earls Ferry heritage area is not included whatsoever in the current report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, further questions? In which case, thank you very much, Katerina. Okay. We have another deputation from Val Humphrey. And this is relating to item 12.2. Thank you, Ms Humphrey. Your name and address?
My name is Val Humphrey, 127A Whitfield Street, and I'm here tonight to talk about the meeting of electors motion, as you just told. Now, I see the officer's recommendation has 3 points, and the first one sounds good to me. The second one is so obscure that I would be grateful if councillors would tease that out a bit during discussion. When I first read it, I thought it was just in direct contradiction to number 1, but maybe you can tease that out for me. The third one I'm not interested to address this evening. My priority for coming tonight is, and I say when I use the term we, I'm talking about the Bassendean Preservation Group, because I'm representing also the Bassendean Preservation Group tonight. We're partners in the project, which is great. We're very keen about that. But why I'm here tonight is that, on behalf of the group really, I want to explain why you shouldn't feel bad as councillors about moving the footpath back to a higher alignment away from the river, if that's what the survey then...
Ms Humphreys, I think that the existing footpath is not intended to be moved. It's a new footpath that's intended to be installed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll accept that hair splitting. That's fine.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I don't want you to feel bad, about that eventuality, because I'm not here to talk about making financial sense about building a path which is more likely to survive rising river levels, but because it's actually in the best interest of the intentions of the master plan, which is the recovery and ongoing health of the river. And I'd like to help you to appreciate how dire things have become along that intertidal zone there on the Ashfield Flats, and the day-to-day impact of the on the circle of life living along our river boundary. A lot of Bassendean's boundary is the river, and so we need to pay attention to what's actually happening on the other side of the fence, if you like, over the intertidal edge. Now, I'm going to try and read this out because I do tend to waffle on and get off the point a bit. Okay, we all like to walk by the river, and we love to see the darters, drying their feathers on the trees, and the cormorants and the pelicans feeding on the river. What are they doing there? Well, they're not trying to get on Facebook. They're not there to look good for our local tourism. They're actually hoping to get a feed, and that's why they're there. And if they're there, it's actually a good indicator that there might be some fish in the river still for them to eat. So I take heart from that. What are the fish doing there? Well, the fish are also looking for a feed, and probably a lot of what they feed on is going to be the invertebrates, which will have hatched in the fringing foreshore vegetation, which is the subject of my main concern here. I'm talking about worms and shrimps and mussels and spider crabs and those other little critters that live in that intertidal zone. These invertebrates hang out in the intertidal zone and do an important job for us as well, while they eat and breed. They clean the water, the mussels filter water, and they are there for fish to eat, which is great because people like to fish too, so we can all enjoy that. But if you go down to the river now at a low tide, you'll see that the condition of the fringing vegetation is very poor indeed. And I've been looking at it now for the last 40 years, and I can tell you it bears almost no resemblance to what was there 40 years ago. Now I'm getting off the point again. I'll try and stick to this. Why is this so? Well, there are many pressures that have caused the deterioration of that fringing vegetation. It's not any one thing. Boat wash was our concern 40 years ago when we first started to get worried about the condition of the disappearance of the reeds. Rising salinity is another point. There's a whole species of rushes that grow right in the water, not on they never get exposed, that are not there anymore. The only place that you'll see the Schonapectus validus these days is where freshwater creek or water drains into the river. So you'll see some up at Success Hill. You might see some struggling at the mouth of the Chapman Street drain because fresh water comes out there, although the human pressures on that piece of foreshore are quite strong these days. Many pressures I mentioned, salinity. Also trampling. Now trampling is the one that the placement of the path can actually have an impact on, so it's something that we can work on. Now, we've tried over many years to have an impact on the boats, and we did manage to slow boats down. I think part of the campaign some years ago helped to get us from 8 knots down to 5 knots, but we still have issues with that. Okay, several years ago, you may remember that there was a massive fish death event on this section of the river. That was caused by algae and the deoxygenation of the water. in response, an institution, and I think it might have been Fremantle TAFE or somewhere down there, hatched and released lots of little baby bream fish into the river. And these were monitored over several years, and many survived, which is great. And people catch them, and but they're not big. Because the monitoring shows the surprising finding that they really didn't grow as big as expected over that time period. And the likely explanation for that was given is that they had become largely vegetarians, and they would prefer, thank you very much, to be omnivores. And this is possibly put down to the fact that there's not the little worms and the shrimps and all of those things in the fringing vegetation anymore for them to feed on. So what's important here with this master plan and the fabulous grant that town of Bassendean has won to implement it over 4 years, or parts of it as best they can over 4 years, what's important is that this marine habitat is restored and recreated, restored, and endures along the foreshore. And this is where the trampling aspect, I think, becomes more important. When you look at the master plan, I'm getting off the point, hang on, won't go there. The master plan instructs that there are views to the river that should be scoped in, that's great. And I'm talking about the plan for the design of the bioengineering features along the foreshore. The master plan offers very generous compromises to people who yearn to see the water and who love for their dogs to run free and frolic in the water. Well, that's great, and that's a lovely thing. But we hope to see design features in the plans that are drawn up that will take that into account in the long term and make it harder for the dog frolicking to just happen anywhere along the foreshore. That I know that there should be, there are already 2 sites that have been identified for access into the water along the flats, and maybe there are design features that we can afford with our grant to implement it right the way along that would slow down that incursion, because there's no doubt about it, when you try and plant, Bassendean Preservation Group has stopped trying to put rushes in the river where it's not fenced. There are 2 sections of foreshore down there that have been fenced, or still have bits of fence on them. The group's been working there in conjunction with the state government authorities, and we've produced some real results. But that's why, because they're not being trampled. The landscape design detail of the foreshore is nearly on the drawing board. Let's see what people with some experience in bioengineering habitats can come up with. The master plan also instructs temporary fencing while it's being established. The preservation group people have been trying to re-establish rushes since the 1990s, and at that time saw the main threats to success being boat wash. Now a bigger hazard is dogs, and we know there is no point in planting in sections of the river where dogs have free access. I'm a dog lover, but this is the reality. You'll see successes in the 2 small stretches, which I've just explained. I think it would be great if you could go down and see for yourself how bare it is down there at the moment, and how much recovery is actually needed. You could go down on the morning of Saturday, April the 6th, which is going to be the lowest tide between here and probably the other side of winter, and have a look around 7 a.m. That will be your best chance of seeing what low tide reveals. I did this back in January when tides were a bit lower than they're going to be on that April day, but I was horrified to see that a section of river where clusters of pygmy mussels should still be, and were seen a year ago, they've actually disappeared. Now we can see that there are shells on the ground where obviously some critters, probably ducks, maybe rats, have found these mussels and broken the shells. So you know that they're probably there under the eroded bank, but where they were clustering on the rushes, gone. And there's just hardly any sign of that sort of life. Little wormy things, the white things on logs, and just no signs of life there.
Val, I'm going to ask you to finish up, thanks.
Okay. I hope that I've reinforced why it's proposed that what is proposed in the master plan is a good idea. Please appreciate the pragmatic compromises that have been made by the master plan, and it's been made with the benefit of the community of dog walkers in mind. That's great. But the landscaping design can take into account what I was talking about earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
thank you, Val. And just a word to say that we are very grateful for all the work that the Bassendean Preservation Group have done over many, many years. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And if you want to see some photos or talk about it later, I'm happy to field questions.
Okay, I'm going to get the councillors to ask you questions. Val, if you'd like to stay at the microphone. So Councillor Polifka, were you going to ask a question?
Look, I understand that those are two fairly destructive forces. The boats moving along at speed, the wake eroding the bank, and you say now the dogs frolicking. Presumably that's their owners following them as well, or?
Oh, yeah, it's sometimes, but not rarely, I think, actually. People who actually go into the river these days are probably on a stand-up paddleboard. There's stand-up paddleboarding happens. There's kayakers. Not so many people swim in the river. Back in the day when I moved into the neighbourhood, that was where we went to cool down in the evenings. We'd swim at Sandy Beach. That was great. Those days, not too many people swim there anymore.
Well, apparently whilst the Brin are small, the bull sharks aren't. But in terms of the, I suppose, restraining the dogs from interacting with the bank and causing its degradation, if there were measures in place whereby it was assured that dogs would remain on lead, would that go some way to addressing that concern?
Look, I think that would go an enormous way to do it. I understand that the resources of the town of Bassendean would be very stretched by such a provision. And from time to time, there have been attempts to encourage that, but it's never really been followed through with any strength. I mean, my understanding is that as a Bush Forever site, it would be really advisable if that was the case. But it's a concession that's been made by in the master plan to allow that to continue. And, you know, it's a lovely thing, but it's a problem.
Let's say someone were minded to ask of the master plan that there was more opportunity for an interface between dogs and the river, then if they were seeking that, then in exchange for that, they might have to make the concession that dogs would always be on lead.
Sure, that would be a way.
Well, I'd take that any further. Thanks.
Okay. Councillors, further questions? Councillor Burke?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Thanks so much, Val. You mentioned about the rising river levels. In that area, does it flood regularly in the winter?
In winter, yeah, it's always muddy. Down there are particular sections, particularly halfway between the boardwalk and Sandy Beach Reserve, where it's definitely lower than others. And so definitely in that area, the 0.8 alignment, which I understand is still to be properly surveyed, would take it back from there, the path back from there. Yeah, it floods, and the expectation is that will continue to increase. So that's the when asked at a meeting of Ashcan that I attended some months ago, Andy Williams from DBCA was answering questions to the members of Ashcan, and he explained it in economic terms. You know, if you're going to build a path, then it really needs to be somewhere where it's not going to get undermined, and it needs to be a year-round one. And so I think that's the thinking that's driving the following the 0.8 contour. Yeah, and it seems to me to add to the make it easier for in future years for there to be less trafficking. Less walking right along the river. If you go there today, you'll see in some places where people have abandoned that path and they still walk within an inch of the edge of the foreshore, which is actually a bit risky these days because a lot of it's undercut. But actually, you can see that people always, like to go right by the river. Now, unless we fence the whole lot forever, then that's going to, that's just going to be one of those things. But with a good vegetation plan, it may be possible to discourage a lot of that. So that's where the detailed design, I think, is going to be so important to get that right and to keep that in mind. And so while some sections of the community are really very keen that the most important thing is to keep to allow the people to walk right, to have the all-weather path right next to the water, I think that's not the highest priority. And so don't feel bad about changing it. When they first put laid bitumen at Sandy Beach Reserve, I think it was during the 1990s. Prior to that, if you went to Sandy Beach with your car, you just drove straight off the road into the park, and you might park right next to the river, or you might park under a tree if it was sunny, but you could park anywhere you liked. Then in the 1990s, a few things happened around there, and it was decided to put a proper car park there so that people weren't parking just everywhere. So what they did was they put a car park road straight down the middle of the reserve, and put with the toilet on one side, so that's where the thing went, and all of the parking bays were right on the river, because that's where people wanted to go. It was just a way of approaching, this is how it should be, let's pretend it's King's Park and we can all sit in our cars and look out of it. Yeah. But then some years later, there was wisdom that it would be better actually if the car park was away from the water, and that people could actually get to the water and not have to walk around cars to get to it. You know, so there's a change of thinking that perhaps might take hold here too.
Might I suggest that the change of thinking comes with better education about wetlands going forward? So I have a question as well. I note that there has been some suggestions from some quarters that you should just put a pile of rocks along the foreshore to protect the foreshore from the undermining of the boats. Now, my understanding is that that would be an utter disaster for a wetlands area with the intertidal zone. Would you agree that the intertidal zone needs to be maintained to actually have a decent wetlands environment, particularly if we're looking at restoration?
Well, look, I think there is scope for some mix there, but to think that the problem is solved by sort of random boulders in the river is selling it short. You need a variety of habitat opportunities, I think, is more the way to look at it. So there can be some. I think the placement of some rocks would be good. The spider crabs would love it. Talk to people with riverside properties, and those who've got bricks in the river might pick up a brick and say, look, there's a spider crab, and put the brick back. But we don't want the river to be landscaped like that.
Okay.
We need care and careful design, and many opportunity for habitat for these critters that I'm talking about, because otherwise we have a river with no fish in it, with no water birds, and
I think it's very disappointing.
Just some nice rocks.
Yeah, I think it's very disappointing that the black-lip mussels have receded, because that was an incredible project. So thank you, Val, for your efforts. It's been really, really greatly appreciated. Councillors, we'll move on now from deputations, and we'll move to public question time. Now again, I have several questions have been sent in by email, and again, some people have indicated that they will be in the room and some will not. So I have John Margan, who has sent in several questions, but he's not going to attend. So those questions will be answered by the administration in email, and will appear, the responses will appear in the minutes of the meeting. The same goes for Stuart Young. These questions all relate to the Nurstead Avenue precinct. And so, noting that she's out of the room, I will go to the next person. Jean Anning is the next person I had with some questions. Jean, would you like to come up to the microphone and ask your questions?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I have a migraine. It's just started, so I don't think I'll do justice to... can I put these as...
On notice?
On notice.
You certainly may.
The Mayor has... Well, I've emailed them in, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you. And the other person who had questions was Katerina Wolf, but she's out of the, oh no, you're back. So Katerina, would you like to come to the microphone and ask your questions?
Sorry. Yeah. Look,
Katerina, if we could just keep it to a couple of questions, your most important questions, if you don't mind.
I will. Look, given the focus of the Heritage Assessment Report in the appendix on the area references Success Hill South, why have Earls Ferry Court properties at the western end of this area, with exception of number 2 Earls Ferry Court, been omitted from the report? So that's adding to what I said before. Figure 2 and actually figure 3 on page 153 and 4, I think, suggest that they should have been included. So can the town of Bassendean please advise which frame the remaining properties are covered under, and why they are not being considered within the cultural heritage and geographic context?
Okay, I might suggest that will have to be taken on notice unless the CEO would like to.
No, Madam Mayor, all questions regarding Elstree Court Success Hill will be taken on notice tonight because of the level of detail. Some of them arrived after the midday close-off, and I think the officer is going to make a presentation, and some of the statements he makes at the presentation will also provide some context. So rather than deal with them now, we're going to deal with them in a more fulsome way post the meeting but before the council meeting. And if the residents stay and listen to the Manager of Planning Regulation, he might also have some other news which might please the residents.
Okay, and just following on from that, if the responses that we provided to these questions taken on notice, obviously if residents have further questions, subsequent questions, they can be emailed in and you will provide a response to those questions?
That is correct, Madam Mayor.
Yep, okay. Thank you very much. And can I ask, Mr. CEO, could the councillors be provided with those responses to those questions prior to the OCM next week?
Yes, Madam Mayor, that was always the intention.
Thank you very much. Would you
Fantastic.
be happy with that?
That's absolutely fine, because my next question relates to data as well and percentages. So that would be fantastic if the answers could be made available.
I think it would be good to have everything in writing backwards and forwards, and for you and your compatriots to actually see the information in written form. That would probably be better than getting a patchy answer now, which may not be complete, because I do note from some of these questions that I think there's a level of detail that's required. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Yeah, as long as that comes through before next week's meeting, that would be fantastic.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Okay, thank you. And it is an item that's early in the piece, so if you do stay for the presentation. Okay, now, I don't believe there are any other questions unless anyone. Mr. Ben Woodward, would you like to come to the stand?
Why is
And
it
you're-
always so funny when I'm asking a question? Ben Woodward, 77 Whitfield Street, Bassendean. Hey, in relation to Decision 9, Item 12.2, that's motions from the AGM, the local government reform requiring councils to implement a community engagement charter is now in place. It was a gunner for quite a few years, but I believe it's now in place. Can I get a confirmation or denial of that?
I might ask the Manager of Governance because I think that is incorrect, but I'll get clarification. Thanks, Ben.
It is certainly part of the amendment legislation. However, regulations guiding the preparation of said document are not in place as yet. I would imagine that would be prior to end of year, and we're going to be a party of getting that out as soon as possible.
All right, well, that somewhat negates my question, although it kind of makes the situation worse, because the question was going to be, is there a mandated timeline that has to be in place by? Other question, in preparing that brief report regarding Decision 9, did the officer actually verify the current reach metrics of the town's Facebook page posts?
No.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, If we have no further questions, I'm going to move on to the reports. Okay? So, the first report is the consideration of motions from the 4th of February General Meeting of Electors. And Mr. CEO, who would like to deal with that one?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I'll commence proceedings, and if there's specific questions relating to any of the areas, then the
Councillors.
relevant technical officer will take questions.
Okay.
But yeah, as you can see with the report, there were a total of 15 motions, 10 of which were carried at the meeting. This report deals with those 10, and the others will appear in the minutes of the meeting, which is also part of the recommendation at the end of the report. The report's been written in such a way that each decision will be dealt with next week at the council meeting as you progress. So it'll be 12.2 decision 1, 12.2 decision 2, rather than doing an en bulk recommendation at the end. So it's been set up quite simply that we'll deal with each decision in the order that they were moved at the meeting. The relevant officers in general are here, apart from the Director of Corporate Services. So if there's anything related to that item, that can be taken on notice, or we can email Paul during the week.
Might I suggest that councillors simply go to the ones that are of most interest to them rather than going through every single motion? So, councillor, I'd ask you just to scan through the list and ask your questions on the ones that are of most interest to you. Or the ones that you have questions on, sorry. Can I ask a question on number 5? I would have thought that particular reinstate traffic signals at West Road and Guildford Road, is that not that's a main roads one, is it not?
That's why the officer's comment says
Yes.
it's not in our authority to make those changes, and therefore we don't support the notice of motion because it's not in our area of jurisdiction.
Yep,
It's a state government responsibility.
that's what I thought. Okay.
Perhaps for the benefit of Val, who's provided a great deputation tonight, I can provide further context to
Number 7.
decision 7. So I agree the wording is probably be improved, but what it's basically saying to the proponents, which was the Ashfield Can, is that a concept plan is a concept plan, and just because there's a line on the plan that says the path moves significantly to the north of the existing path, detailed design will determine where the alignment will be rather than the current concept plan, because that's what's causing the concern, is the distance of the line drawn in the concept plan. But until we do detailed design and do the heights, because the concern is from that particular group is that 0.8 above natural height doesn't seem to be any different to where almost the current path is. So what we've said is that we'll, in the process of doing detailed design, actually mark where that is and set the heights, and then there'll be further community consultation, which Ashfield Can is welcome to participate in, and the outcome will be the outcome. Democracy, at the end of the day, will determine what the plan does based on a scientific detailed design, as you have said, rather than the wishes of one particular group. So that's the context, is just to give them the surety that there will be a path, and if it can be as close to the river as it can be, but providing scientific and conservation protection, then that will obviously be the ultimate outcome.
Can I ask a subsequent question about that, Mr. CEO? Now, I've heard regular statements that appear to be incorrect, that the existing path will be removed. Now, my understanding, having read the Ashfield Flats Master Plan, is that there is no intention of removing the existing riverside path. There is an intention, to build a new path somewhat inland. And as you said, in detailed planning, the trajectory of that path will be determined in more detail. But can you confirm that the existing riverside path, there is no intention to remove it per se?
The report clearly states the path will not be maintained, but it will not be removed.
Yes.
So in other words, it will die a natural death over time, and no money will be spent on maintaining a path that is obsolete in the future.
Which then brings me to my next question. As outlined by Ms Humphreys, clearly parts of that riverside path flood every year, and my assumption is that parts of the path, the riverside path, will deteriorate more quickly than others. But if it's not being removed in its entirety, is there any idea of the natural lifespan of that path before it completely degrades in? I don't suppose we have that information. No. Okay. Okay. Councillors, any further? Councillor Plifka.
We're still talking about that item 7. So that is the decision 7, the amendment to the Ashfield Flats Master Plan. Now, I see the officer's recommendation. I mean, that seems to me to, whilst the first point there says does not support, the second point there seems to substantially give effect to what one might distill from the first part of the resolution as carried, which is to explore that connection. Would that be an accurate view of what's being attempted there?
Well, item 1, the reason that we don't support an amendment to the Ashfield Flats Master Plan is it's not our plan, and it's the state government's plan, it's DPCA's plan, so we don't have the authority to amend it. So that clearly states number 1 is that's purpose. Number 2 is to provide surety to the group that we will work with anybody during the detailed design to come up with a path that does provide an ongoing connection for as they do use it now. Will it be in the same place will be determined by the science rather than the wishes of a particular group.
All you're signalling by part 1 is the process, which is that this isn't the town of Bassendean that's the ultimate decision maker, it's the DBCA, and so that's why the first part, the town can't support amending something, because in terms of amending that would ultimately be a decision for the DBCA, is that correct?
Correct. When council, we supported a master plan. We did not produce it, but we supported it. So council can remove its support, but the plan will stay in place.
And then the second part, what you're saying, there's effectively that what they had sought is that would be part of the implementation, that it would be considered during the design phase, and as you've said, that would be guided by the science. So if the science was such that it permitted that, then that might be something that's possible. But it would be having regard to the nature of the intertidal zone and the interactions with any hard surfaces.
Yeah, the funding is quite clear that conservation and protection is priority number 1. So anything that falls behind number 1, which will be human activity, will be given less priority in the design.
So can I ask an additional question, Mr. CEO? Many years ago, it's my recollection that some ratepayers were interested in the installation of boardwalks to reduce the human interaction with natural areas. In other words, boardwalks raise it up above the actual wetlands area. If the reason that was discounted was the cost, but if there is a strong enough community sentiment to have sections of boardwalk installed in some of these very sensitive areas, would it not be something that the community could potentially, particularly community groups, could they not themselves fundraise to contribute to something like that? Or lobby certain entities for financial contributions?
I think if the detailed design supports the structure, then advocacy to the state and federal government would be the next logical step to provide that linkage. There's already a boardwalk down there now, as you know, which is probably in one of the lowest areas, so it's an extension of that particular section, which is on state government land. Remember, we only own about, Cole's not here, but I think it's less than, it might be about 12%, so the land is, even controlling the dogs, as Val said, we don't have the control of state land, so it's not up to us to decide whether dogs are on lead, it's up to another department to decide that, and then it's up to their rangers to police it, not our rangers, because we don't have any authority.
Okay, so Councillor Carter, do you have a question on this one? No. Okay, so councillors, unless we have other questions, Councillor Carter.
Sorry, not on that one, but on the one coming up.
Which
Sorry.
one would you like?
Look, I'm interested in the Decision 9, the communications framework, because I seek to understand what this means. I think from my understanding of it, it's the way Facebook works and how to maximise our use of that rather than a communication strategy. Am I right?
Might want to ask Ben.
Can we ask him?
procedurally do that?
You?
Probably not. I might refer to Joe.
Thank you. Yes, I'm glad that Mr. Woodward has brought it to our attention. And to better understand it, social media is but one part. The communications charter that is being referred to is the way in which council and the administration interact with each other, council and the community interact with each other, and the way in which that goes about. Part of that being social media is part of that. We would have a social media policy separate to that as part of a communications policy. They're two separate pieces that are being, so one we drive from the council, which would be the policy, and the other one is a communication charter that the state is requiring as part of a legislative piece.
Can I follow up on that one? Yes, as part of this, because please bear with me, I'm old. As part of this communication strategy, will it address things like innovative use of Facebook, Instagram and other social media? Because there are subtleties that we need to get a handle on.
Did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Carter. The actual motion talks about a framework and categorising as either must know or good to know. We currently already spend money on Facebook with posts, so it's not as if we don't do some of the things that we're alleged not to do, because we did it with Bassendean Oval survey. And we spent money getting a greater outreach because we realised with 4 or 5 days to go, anybody between 18 and 30 were basically missing from our sample, so we use metrics to push out. So we currently do that, and the motion as it reads, I have no issue with the motion as it reads, because we currently do that. So it's just a matter of putting it into a more of a policy framework to capture what we are doing. And I'll say it again. There is a role for social media, but it's not the way that we engage with our community. If they expect an instant response to every post, they will not get it through local government. We are not set up for that.
I don't think that was the issue.
Okay.
You know, like I said, I'm not sure.
Okay, so we're going to move on from that. Councillors, unless there are any other questions, relating to this particular topic, I would like to move on to the next item, which some people in the room are eagerly waiting for, and that's the Success Hill South Heritage considerations. So, yes, and you can just turn on that microphone, thank you. So,
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So item 12.3, Success Hill South considerations. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider recommendations of a heritage assessment report prepared by Hocking Heritage and Architecture. The assessment encompasses the area bound by the railway line, Guildford Road and Aylesbury Court, and for the purposes of the report is identified as Success Hill South. The report partly fulfils the requirements of a council resolution from the 19th of December 2023 in relation to Nurstead Avenue, a community workshop held with residents along Nurstead Avenue in March 2024, and the technical information needed to inform the preparation of the Bassendean Town Centre Precinct Structure Plan, or PSP. The reason the area includes a broader area to Nurstead Avenue is that it is intended to inform the PSP. As such, the assessment aligns with the Success Hill frame identified in the local planning strategy subject to the PSP. The Heritage Assessment makes 3 recommendations for the area, including the inclusion of additional properties on the town's local heritage survey, further investigation of other properties for the potential inclusion within the area, and inclusion of development requirements or design guidelines to be specified within the precinct structure plan for the area. The officer's recommendation proposes commencing place-specific reviews for the 4 identified properties for potential inclusion within the local heritage survey. I acknowledge the strong desire, particularly from the residents along Nurstead Avenue, to protect the aesthetic and cultural value of the area, and I appreciate Katarina's comments that she made earlier in her deputation. The March 2024 workshop last year reaffirmed a desire of those residents to develop a set of design guidelines to guide redevelopment in the area to ensure it is sympathetic to the existing older homes in the context of an R160 and R100 zoning. I'd remind Council and the residents that the density has in part been imposed by the state government. Administration is committed to developing the design guidelines to ensure development is contextually sympathetic for the area. We believe it is the PSP is the appropriate planning mechanism to achieve this, as outlined in the report. As such, we'll be working with our appointed planning consultant GHD to develop these guidelines. Design guidelines could include provisions relating to setbacks, building materials, design detail, and front boundary treatments, and landscaping provisions. As part of this process and recognising the value of community input, administration, along with GHD, are happy to engage these residents and host a separate community engagement workshop at a convenient time with these residents. Noting we are holding 3 community workshops with the Citizens Panel. We've had the first one earlier this month, with the second on the 7th of April. This will provide them with the opportunity to provide meaningful input into the development of built form guidelines for Nurstead Avenue and the broader Success Hill frame. I can update the recommendation to Council between now and next week, as well as respond to the questions taken on notice in writing, because there was a few and some of them quite complex, and I want to give a meaningful response to the questions raised by the community members. I'll also provide some just brief commentary in relation to interim measures, and as I note, it is a concern for the residents, and I suspect a question coming up from the elected members. We do have interim measures for certain types of development should people look to actually take advantage of the R100 or R160 density within that location, including the requirements for 3-storey development or more, or any multiple dwelling development, to go through our DRP assessment process, which would include preliminary engagement early on in the process, and that would require the development to be assessed against the 10 principles of urban design, which includes the first one being context and character, which would also lean on our adopted built form and character study to guide our or staff recommendations in relation to aspects of that. Clause 67 of the regs also outlines matters for local governments to consider when assessing an application. In particularly relevant to this matter would be M and N. So clause 67M is consideration of includes compatibility of the development and the relation to adjoining land, and clause 67N, amenity of the locality, and again would be guided by the adopted built form and character study that we have, which is referenced in this local or heritage assessment report. Noting that this is also now being presented to Council, we could also utilise this heritage assessment report to provide or help inform our technical assessment. And if the benefit, well, there's probably two parts to this. Staff are recommending the principles are included in the precinct structure plan as the appropriate mechanism on the basis that it'll have strength in that it'll be adopted under clause 33 of our local planning scheme. So it's adopted with the scheme. We could, when we do that amendment to include the precinct structure plan as part of the scheme, we could specifically pull those design guideline requirements out. If you refer to 33 of our scheme, it refers to design requirements specified within a adopted precinct structure plan. So it will make reference to it there. And in terms of the ability for those provisions to be changed at a later date, noting that it would also need the endorsement of the state government, it has an extra layer. If a local planning policy for our heritage areas, such as local planning policy number 4, was to be revoked by council next month, we'd lose our 4 current heritage areas that we currently have. The precinct structure plan, I guess, offers that additional statutory strength to it, and that would be our preferred mechanism, particularly noting that we are underway in the precinct structure planning process. We have an intention to workshop built form outcomes with the citizens panel to help inform those. As mentioned earlier, we're happy to have an additional workshop with those residents, particularly on Nurstead Avenue and the broader Success Hill frame, to develop provisions or have their input inform those provisions and to bring them along for the journey with us in the context of R100 and R160 development. I don't think us trying to rush through a local planning policy as an interim measure is a good idea. It's something that needs to be have thought and consideration to, and I think we're doing that via the precinct structure planning process.
Thank you very much. Councillors, questions? Councillor Plivka.
Yes, so obviously the precinct structure plan is your preeminent document for ensuring the protections and the like. How long would such a document take to be prepared? What's sort of the indicative time frame at this stage?
The indicative timeline is a draft will be finalised later this year. Presenting it to council, likely aiming for a November meeting. Obviously October there will be a new council, and before that there will be the caretaker period, and a decision like this would be impacted by that.
In the past few years, how many applications would have come across the town in terms of R160 and R100 developments? Is that we're not really inundated with them, are we?
In my time at the town, I haven't come across a single development application for more than R40 development for multiple dwellings. I think there's been a couple of joint development assessment panel applications that we've dealt with, and 2 of them were childcare centres and the 3rd was a petrol station.
So I suppose I suppose it's somewhat hypothetical, but given the rate at which we're seeing these applications, the precinct structure plan is probably going to be prepared in a time frame which would guard against most of these, in that we're not going to see applications coming through which wouldn't be subject to the precinct structure plan. I mean, they always can be, but in terms of the rate at which things have occurred, it would be probably fair to say that we don't expect too many of these applications in the near future.
Particularly based on the current development climate, I'd agree with that sentiment.
So, councillors, I've got a couple of questions. Can I just ask if there was an application for an R160 or whatever type of development? You've mentioned the Carrack built form and character study. If an applicant was, if it was rejected and they decide to take it to SAT, how does that stack up in the SAT process as a defence against, building something that doesn't fit the character of the area? I think that's speculation, isn't it?
Yeah, I would suggest speculation, Madam Mayor. It's very hard to predict. There could be multiple reasons why an application could be refused. If we were hanging our hat on one element under the deemed provisions, I suggest that it would be very hard to speculate on.
Okay, I withdraw that question, sorry. My other question is, with the precinct structure plan and the provisions that you're looking at incorporating into that plan, does precinct structure plans need to be approved by the minister? Is that correct?
They are endorsed by the state.
Yes, they're endorsed by the state government. So does that does that particular minister have the power to reject any part of the precinct structure plan?
Potentially, but that is the reason why we have a technical appendice for a heritage assessment for the area, which recommends design guidelines bespoke to the area to put that argument forth and carried through. And yeah, I would suggest that because we are justifying it with the technical documents, that those provisions will be carried through. That precinct as a whole, the successful frame South, as I've referred to that report, is remarkably different to the remaining of the town centre in terms of Old Perth Road, and it does warrant its own bespoke design guidelines. And I'd suggest it would be, I'd struggle to see a situation where there wouldn't be some form of design guidelines bespoke to that area that wouldn't be supported by the state.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillors, Councillor Polifka has no questions, yes?
Yeah, I'll indulge in some acronyms. So look, it might provide some comfort to those that want to see these provisions sooner rather than later, but when does the PSP become a SEP? So that is, when does the precinct structure plan become a seriously entertained planning proposal such that it would have influence on planning applications?
Once the document is advertised, we'd be giving it due regard in our assessments, and then it will take full effect when finally adopted and endorsed.
Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you. From what you're saying then, it doesn't really matter if the Nurstead Avenue or the Nurstead estate area has a heritage protection over it, because that can be reviewed under the precinct structure plan.
So I guess in my discussion I've made several points in relation to it not requiring a heritage area. The first being that the local planning policy could be revoked at any time by council, which would mean we'd lose all our heritage areas. But we are looking at bespoke design guidelines as per the recommendation in the Hocking Heritage and Architecture Report for Nurstead Avenue and the broader Success Hill frame that's identified for the precinct structure planning area. And we are also happy to run a separate workshop with the residents and community members to bring them along for that journey and help develop those design guidelines. And as mentioned with Councillor Polifka, the development climate to see substantial development and someone take full advantage of that R100 zoning in there, it's probably not the right climate at this point in time. It's been 15 months since we last met. We haven't seen a substantial application in that period of time. Even more broader in other locations such as along the town centre. So in the interim period, I don't think it'll be a significant issue if we don't have a rushed through local planning policy, noting that the precinct structure plan will address this.
Can I ask one more?
Yes.
Thank you. So you're saying that it doesn't really matter if there's a heritage overlay of that area. Is that what you're saying? Because really it'll be looked at later.
Yeah, the residents,
So,
as I understand it, desired design guidelines for this area to ensure future development in the context of an R100, R160 is sympathetic to the context and character of particularly Nurstead Avenue and the street. And I'm comfortable that'll be looked at as part of the precinct structure plan, and there are interim measures in between now and then. So there will be bespoke design guidelines for this location.
okay, one last follow-up and then I'll quiet. So in other words, when the precinct structure plan is being developed and devised, the fact that you might have, say for instance, theoretically, a heritage overlay of that area, doesn't that strengthen your precinct structure plan's protection of heritage in that place?
The heritage area would just be identified via a local planning policy, and it would be, similar in terms of it would be given due regard during the assessment of applications. So, in my view, it's an unnecessary double up.
Okay. I will ask a subsequent question. The precinct structure plan and the design guidelines, I'm assuming that you envisage a set of design guidelines that may well be similar to what you've got here for perhaps, I don't know, Kenny Street, but they're embedded into the precinct structure plan. So those design guidelines embedded into that PSP, they become, correct me if I'm wrong, they become the be-all and end-all in respect to guiding other new developments within that close proximity to heritage properties. Would that be correct?
The design guidelines in the precinct structure plan would operate very similar to a local planning policy in that there'll be provisions that future development will be assessed against, and they'll either comply or they won't comply, and the town's recommendation will be based off that.
Okay, so those design guidelines are going to be essential in achieving some of the things that might be the aspiration of perhaps the residents and perhaps the council as well, should they be accepted. Okay, councillors, further questions on this? Otherwise, Councillor Ames?
Just a real quick comment, and I'm also just to
Questions?
get through all of the jargon. What you're saying, Alex, is that the town of Bassendean is working with those along the Nurstead Avenue to work towards ensuring that this area is going to be kept in its character from now moving into the future, with all that we're doing in conjunction with our precinct structure plan.
That is correct, and our planning consultant in GHD.
Okay. Okay, councillors, I think we need to draw a line under this and move to the next item, which is 12.4, Scheme Amendment 1, Short-Term Rental Accommodation. If you'd like to provide some context on this one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
So the purpose of this report is for council to consider to initiate a standard amendment to local planning scheme number 11 to ensure the town's local planning scheme aligns with new deemed and model land use classes and general definitions introduced into the state planning framework. Most significantly, the amendment will see the introduction of hosted short-term rental accommodation and unhosted short-term rental accommodation and removal of superseded land uses within the town zoning table. It should be noted, the changes to the planning and development local planning scheme regulations September last year now exempt dwellings from requiring development approval for hosted accommodation in all circumstances, and unhosted short-term rental accommodation where the dwelling is in the metro area, registered under the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act 2024, and is used for no more than 90 days in a relevant 12-month period, meaning that someone can register and have an Airbnb for 90 days within a 12-month period, and it doesn't require development approval, and that's been in since September last year. So the initiation of the amendment will provide guidance as to the appropriate land use permissibility when we consider applications for beyond the 90 days for unhosted and hosted accommodation. It should be noted we cannot consider a land use within a zoning table as an X use in all zones, so we need to be able to consider it within the scheme. The administration are also in the process of reviewing our local planning policy number 18, short-term accommodation, to reflect these requirements, and we'll be exploring options for particularly unhosted accommodation from distances from local centres and centre zones if they require additional management requirements to address our concerns. But there will be, the policy won't dictate where the approved use can be within a proximity to a train station. I'll rule that out now for you. Any questions?
If this is intended to be statewide, why are they requiring local governments to amend their local planning schemes? Why don't they just pass some other form of subsidiary legislation which covers the field so that we don't have to go through this?
It's a good question, probably one for the state. So the deemed provisions do automatically apply, but we need to have them within our zoning table and give them appropriate land uses. The state, land use permissibility, and the state has given us that option. So for example, for unhosted short-term accommodation, we've designated it as a D use within the mixed use and local centre zones, and an A use in the residential zone, and an X use in all other zones. So they've given us that opportunity. Council pleased, they could amend the initiation report to have it designated as an A use within the mixed use and local centre zones as well. That's where the
So we've got some choice.
yeah, some choice, but limited.
Okay, and so once we make that choice, which is essentially just ticking a box, we get this back to the state government, they process it a lot faster than they did our actual scheme?
I would like to think so, given that we have followed their amendment report template that they provided local governments. It's their expectation of us to do it. They have advised us it isn't just an administrative amendment, and it is a standard amendment, so we do have to advertise it because it is changing land use permissibility within the zoning table. So there is a delay in advertising, but the expectation would be that, given that we are aligning it to the state's requirements, that it should hopefully be processed relatively quickly, at least before January 1st, 2026, when the next round of the requirements under the STRA take effect.
In terms of what we go out to advertising with, we'll go out with the most restrictive of the options that the state government has afforded us?
That's a decision for council. We've opted for a discretionary use in the mixed, in the local centre and centre zones on the basis that it can be considered quite appropriate. For our perspective, that's within the town centre or close to shopping centres, similar to the arrangement under the existing policy. And then an A use in the residential zone, which would cover our more suburban residential areas up in Eden Hill and down in...
Look, I suppose there's a recurrent question when it comes to the advertising. So if there's two options and we advertise one, would we then indicate to the community that there were in fact two options so that we could get the feedback as to which they were interested in? In that obviously if we choose one here and we lead with that, the community might not necessarily be aware that there was another option. I mean, how would we incorporate that into our advertising?
We would lead with what was initiated by council. If it was the request of council in our communication with the community, we could include additional information as to other options. It's not the preferred approach of staff, obviously. We'd prefer to pursue the amendment as initiated and then hopefully as adopted.
So when that council makes a decision, council will say, look, there were two choices, we've made this choice, this is why, and then let the community, I suppose, understand why we're saying that, and if they're aware of the other option, they might tell us otherwise, but at least we would be leading with what we say as council, as the elected representatives we feel is the best outcome for the community.
Yeah, that's a decision of council. Yeah.
Councillors, further questions? Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is 12.5, Arts, Culture and Events Committee.
Oh, okay. See you, Alex.
Good evening, Alex. Have a nice night.
Sorry. Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. Sorry. Look, there's a number of reports within this committee item, so I'm just going to open it up for questions and see where that goes. Thank you.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, and this might be to the Officer or the Department of Governance, just in regards to one of the items in the Arts, Events and Culture meeting regarding the percent for public art and the positioning of the art within the town. I believe there's an art installation to be installed in the next or coming months or whenever we do push the button at the Park Estate, which is across the road from my private residence here within the town. So just wanted to find out if that conflict of interest needs to be given.
Is there a shared boundary? Is it touching?
No, it's not sea, it's across the road.
Yeah. It would be a boundary because it's a road.
There's a road between
There's a road in between.
Yeah, but I think it's a proximity interest.
It's proximity, yes,
So you
yes.
need to make a declaration at the next meeting. But I would imagine, given the fact that it's not touching your boundary, you would be able to stay and debate and vote.
No worries, and I'll fill out the appropriate documentation when required. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up, Councillor Ames. Okay. Further questions on this item? Okay. So councillors, we'll move on to 12.6, which is the Bassendean Local Emergency Management Committee. Again, is there anything to cover this other than what's in the report?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's a fairly standard committee. However, I would draw your attention to the fact that as an outcome from the joint recovery exercise that was held late last year in December, a recommendation or a motion was put to the committee to invite or approach the City of Bayswater to hold joint local emergency management meetings. That was supported by the committee last week, so subject to approval at council next week, we'd like to explore that option. And just a comment or two regarding that, it seems like a sensible idea, simply because it builds relationships, it's an opportunity for collaboration, it reduces duplication, and there's skills and expertise right around both tables that could be usefully shared. So.
From a timeshare point of view, it seems incredibly logical. But Councillor Carter, you have a question.
I do. Do you have any idea of how the City of Bayswater feels about joint BLM? Well, we're all going to be a BLMEC, aren't we? Yes, true. I've only had an anecdotal conversation with my counterpart at Bayswater, but there was no resistance. It seemed like it was worth considering.
Councillor Ames?
Then I can say congratulations. You've done.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Obviously, diving deeper into the compartments of my my brain. Now being an employee of the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, is there a situation that I also have to declare an impartiality interest for items within BLEMEC and anything to do with decisions that are involving DFS?
I'm going to suggest no, because it is in the interest of all residents and all council members around the table. You will be deriving no benefit from any... Yes, I was going to say something funny, but I won't. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If that changes at any stage, please let me know. And if there's anything that is directly related, I'll be sure to declare that conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ames. Okay, councillors, any questions on this one? Okay, we'll move to item 12.7, which is the verge maintenance policy. As Mr. Asmus makes his way to the hot seat.
Good evening, councillors. I've just dropped off the a plan there. Now that plan is an attachment to the council report, one of I think 4 attachments. Only noticed yesterday there was a slight error with the plan, so just wanted to bring that to your attention tonight. The error was that Old Perth Road was actually shown incorrectly. The red line on that map now shows the area that the policy covers. So really pretty much all the way between Guildford Road and West Road. I think previously it showed it along Surrey Street, Old Perth Road past Surrey Street to Guildford Road. So what we'll do is we'll make sure we load that plan up before next Tuesday as the latest version. And plus also the plan actually is quite good to illustrate the roads while I'm talking about the policy. Use it as a reference. Thank you.
Great map.
All right, so the purpose of this report is for Council to consider the new verge maintenance policy. Each year, and most of this is already in the report, but I'll cover it off quickly. Each year the town budgets approximately $600,000 to maintain a significant amount of residential, commercial and industrial verges. These funds form a substantial portion of the town's annual parks and reserves operating budget. Based on benchmarking that we did with other councils in the Perth metro area, the discussion with them clearly showed that the town offers a far higher service in terms of verge mowing than any other council in the metropolitan area and in fact Western Australia. While this service has been in place for many years, the use of ratepayer funds to maintain verges fronting privately owned properties is no longer considered a reasonable use of these funds, particularly as there are a lot of residents in the town that are currently maintaining their own verge or mowing their own verge. The proposed policy states that the town will only maintain 5 roads, as per that map, all of which are 4-lane dual carriageways and have a high traffic volume exceeding 15,000 vehicles a day, apart from Old Perth Road. At the moment, the town currently maintains or mows 43 different street sections, and as part of this policy, it's proposed that gets reduced down to 5 as per the map. Along with seeking council approval of the policy, the town has also developed a suite of supporting documents as attached to the report. One is the FAQ sheet. There's also a draft verge maintenance assistance program, and obviously the map that I've handed out as well. If the policy is approved by council, these documents will be loaded onto our webpage as part of the communication stage, as part of rolling out the policy. Maybe if I could just flag a couple of examples that I guess highlight the concerns around inconsistency with the current service we provide. I've got 2 or 3 examples here I might share with you. Some of the road verges maintained by the town have quite wide verges. So if there is an argument that this is why they're being done, the counter argument is that we also have a number of roads such as Northmore, Villiers, and even a short street, Sylvia Way. They are currently not maintained by the town. Northmore, for example, is 10-metre wide verges, so the residents are maintaining those verges. Villiers is 7.5 metres, and Sylvia Way, which is only a short section of road, has 8-metre wide verges, so they are being maintained by residents. So I think the fact that some verges are very wide, there are clearly streets out there that the town isn't maintaining, residents are. Another example is we currently spend around about $80,000 annually to mow verges along the full length of Anzac Terrace. These verges are only around 4 to 5 metres wide, and the traffic volumes are only about 1,000 vehicles per day, which is really low for a distributor road. Doesn't appear to be any sensible rationale that we would be maintaining those verges based on the verge width and the traffic volumes. In addition, we currently maintain a number of verges along North Road, but there also are a number of residents on North Road maintaining their own verge, so there's a bit of inconsistency there as well. Residents that do currently maintain their own verge are effectively mowing their own verge, which comes at a cost to them, plus also contributing towards others as part of their rates that they pay. So the current service is inconsistent and potentially unfair to those that are currently looking after their verge in the town's view. It is therefore recommended that Council adopt a new verge maintenance policy commencing on the 1st of July 2025. This will in turn make available around $450,000 annually for higher priority funding of Council's choice. Some may be improvements such as infrastructure renewal, improved parks, increased canopy, and a higher standard in those areas. Any questions, please?
Councillors, I'll open up to you for questions first, and then I'll have a question. Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you. Can I say such a thorough report? Congratulations. This has been an anomaly that's really historic, hasn't it? We've started doing some of this. I know down our road there's the corner verges mowed, but none of no one else and no other residents are done. And so I think it's probably well overdue. But have we got a system, and I think you speak about it, about helping people who've traditionally had this done for decades, having to do it themselves? And the other one, corollary to that one, is when people are infirm, and you do speak about that, have we got a system where we can also have a dialogue with the care people, like Amana or Silver Chain or whatever? Sorry, it's a long question.
That's
Forgive
okay.
me.
That's Councillor Carter. I think the assistance program draft document that's attached actually explains, I guess, who could be applicable to receive assistance. That option is going to be available. But in general, I guess what the policy says that if you walk out of your front property and you have a verge, it's yours to maintain, whether that's private, whether it's residential, commercial, or anything, or industrial.
And very briefly, can I say, once you have it across the board, then you can't say, well, so-and-so down the road has it done, why can't I? So I think it's probably going to be, in the end, a lot easier to maintain.
Yeah, and that's why I brought up some of those examples where it's clearly inconsistent, and I think until, we went through and did the level of service review and determined what the cost was and what was actually happening was where we've gone, where this doesn't seem fair, so it needed to be reviewed.
So following on, I have a question in relation to some of the environmental concerns relating to mowing of verges also relates to the spread of some of the problem weeds that we have in the town. And sorry, I can't think of the one that's very prickly, that's an absolute pain for bicycle tyres. But my understanding is that when you have mowing that does multiple verges, the spreading of those weeds is more prolific. Would you agree with that?
I certainly would. I've had verges my whole life as well, so I guess, but that's probably similar. If somebody's maintaining their own verge or mowing the verge, that could spread as well, I guess, is depending on, I'm not sure whether it really matters who's actually doing it. There is a potential for spreading of weeds. Pretty hard to.
I think what I'm getting at is if you're doing your own verge, you're really only mowing your own yard. If you don't have these problems in your own yard, you're not spreading it to multiple other verges. But if you have a mower that is mowing 120 verges and they're going through an area that has this weed, then it can spread to multiple other areas. I think that's the general gist of, certainly that's how it's been explained to me by some of the environmental people who are residents in the town. But I'll open it up to other questions from other Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Shane. We've got some changes to our verge mine that's going to be obviously coming to fruition upon the approval of this. How are we going to be communicating, if at all, to those members of the community that have been having their verges mowed for a number of years and now all of a sudden have got this overgrown front merge that we're now expecting them to look after?
Excellent question. I have been speaking to our communication team, and my view, and I think they share the same view, is that if you currently have the service provided by the town, and assuming the policy is adopted, they actually need a letter. They need a standard letter to say that this is why it's been done, when does it start, have the links to the verge assistance program, that sort of thing. But I think it can't be done, in my view, via social media. It has to be a sort of individual letter. Yeah, absolutely.
Councillors, further questions on this item? Okay, Councillor Plifka.
But to confirm, the implementation of this will save the town $450,000 each year.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, councillors, we'll move on to the next item, which is 12 points. Yep. That can't be. No, it's wrong. 12.8. That's 12.8. The number there is, yeah. So 12.8, James Street parking restrictions, which is pretty self-explanatory. Are there any questions on this one? Okay, we'll move on to the next one, which is 12.9, policy review, asset management. Mr. Asmus, do you want to speak to this one?
Certainly, thank you, Madam Mayor. So this one, I've been fortunate enough to provide a few some commentary via workshops with councillors over the last sort of 8 months. And this one was really around, I guess, formalising some of those discussions. The proposal here is that the existing policies are revoked and that new policy is adopted. Probably the fundamental changes that I'm proposing on the new policy is really around ensuring that we keep maintaining a framework of documents, as I've said at workshops. So that's the asset management plans, asset management strategy, level of service. They need to be reviewed frequently to make sure that the actions are still relevant, and also talk around the need to, I guess, prioritise asset renewal over new infrastructure. So they're probably the 2 or 3 key elements to the proposed policy. So it's recommended that council say approve the new policy based on that. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I won't. I haven't got my question right. So, Councillor Polivka?
So in terms of asset renewal, are we hoping that eventually the policy will move to a situation where we would say that the useful life of an asset, be it a sporting hall or something of that nature, might be 30 years, 40 years at most, where we would then have a fund whereby we could see that we had been accumulating sufficient money to then replenish that asset at the end of its life? Is that sort of the ultimate goal? Is this a step in that direction?
Yes, certainly is, Councillor. So I think at last week's budget workshop we ended a little bit earlier, but as part of the budget, I guess request for next year was funding for carrying out inspections, condition inspections of our buildings. Same with the underground drainage pipe network, which I've raised before. We really need to get a handle on what condition the buildings and the drainage is, same as our footpaths. I think we get most of the inspections carried out within 1 or 2 years, and that will start informing renewal programs.
And so with that emphasis on renewal, obviously we've got a few facilities that have relatively high profile renewal endeavours surrounding them. So it would be the view that that's renewal, but in terms of looking to expand activities to create new facilities that aren't replacing, I suppose, new for old, would it be the case that it's probably prudent that we would first look at that drainage infrastructure before we, I suppose, produce a facility that we didn't already have? So obviously renewal, we're looking to renew our football oval, looking to renew Jubilee, but if we were to try and build an entirely new sort of thing somewhere, it would probably be best that we held off until we had a better understanding of our subterranean infrastructure.
You love saying that word, don't you, subterranean? Certainly that's common sense, really, isn't it? And I'd like to think with the funding that we're requesting next year, and we're already working on sort of a bit of a plan of attack around our inspections and starting those programs. Within the next 1 or 2 years, we should have a really good idea of our assets. And up until now, our roads has been pretty good. We've put a fair bit of money into renewal and inspection of our roads, but like I mentioned, our stormwater drainage, which is extremely high risk, not knowing what condition it is, and our buildings is a priority.
Okay, I'll just ask one quick question, and I'm sure that you're aware of this. Obviously, my query at some of the workshops has been not to renew like to like, to actually evaluate whether an asset actually needs to continue to exist or whether it can be coexisting with another asset. So the renewal should always be evaluated in the first instance as to whether it's required more than anything else. But I'm absolutely positive that the administration are aware of that anyway.
Yeah, and the policies that, that council
Yeah.
has approved over the last 6 months has certainly been incorporating that. And I think the way we do our budget workshops, the projects are put is transparency around those projects, and the discussion around whether it should be replaced or renewed will always happen anyway, between the town and the councillors.
Okay. So councillors, unless we've got further questions, we'll move on to the next one, which is supply and laying of asphalt, road surfacing and road profiling. Now, bearing in mind that the attachment to this is confidential, I would ask if there are any questions, because I think the report is self-explanatory. No? Okay, so we'll move on to the next one, which is 1211, which is project reporting. And would this be you, Mr. CEO?
Noting that Paul is absent, the Director of Corporate Services, if there are questions, I prefer if they were taken on notice.
Okay, councillors? I don't think there's any questions. Okay, so we'll move to 12.12, which is policy review, differential rates refund policy. Now, again, this would have normally been Mr. White, who is not here at the moment. So, councillors, there was a draft amended differential rates refund policy attached. I thought it was fairly self-explanatory, but I would ask if councillors have any questions of the CEO on this particular one. No? Okay, so we'll move to 12.13, which is Audit and Governance Committee. Again, Mr. White would normally be speaking on this one. There were 3 confidential attachments to this particular meeting. So, Mr. CEO, you look like you wish to speak to this.
Only in that the Manager of Governance is more than capable to manage this particular item without Paul being present.
Okay, so councillors, or shall I just go straight to questions? Yes, any questions on this one? Okay, so we'll move to item 12.14, accounts paid. Now, as usual, councillors, I would suggest that if you have any queries on the accounts paid, that you reference the EFT number and put it in writing so that you can get a response, because it's very difficult to pull those up immediately. So we move to 12.15, which is the monthly financial reports, which will not be available until next week's OCM document. Which brings us to the close of the reports. There are a couple of notices of motion. Again, I think they're fairly self-explanatory. Unless you've got questions on those, we'll move on from that. No questions? Okay, so we will move to item 14 will be for next week, notices of motion for the next meeting. There's no urgent business, there's no confidential business. So that brings us to the closure of the meeting, which is at 7:50 p.m. And the next ordinary council meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 22nd of April 2025, commencing at 6 p.m. Thank you everyone for your attendance, thank you for your patience, and thank you staff for the reports. And I'll just wait for the recording to be switched off.